Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good President's Day last week. I know you missed coming to class. I think I saw a couple of you coming here anyway, but that wasn't the right thing to do, and I'm glad that most of you didn't do that. I realize that because of the winter quarter, and I've kind of known this, of course, all along, we don't have too many sessions together this quarter. We really just have two more, and we'll be done. Smart Modular Technologies presentation next week, and then a very interesting presentation on manufacturing technology by the VP of Manufacturing at Cisco Systems. Today, we're really fortunate in having a guest who has come in the past, although last year he bowed out of coming because he was so busy with still yet another change in his engineering / management / startup career. But he's sort of made the big leap, the big transition that he was working on last year, and has agreed to come by and talk to us. I know I've said in the past that there are some speakers that I really like to have come back, and it may sound to you like I'm saying that about every speaker that we've had, but that's not true. There are four, and Youl Banks is absolutely one of them. In fact, he, without putting too much pressure on him, he consistently gets the highest ratings from all the speakers that I've had. Let me tell you just a little bit about him, but his talk, in fact, is a review of his life after Stanford, with a greater emphasis, of course, this time on things he's been doing in the last year or two, but I don't want to take away from that either. He is a Stanford alum. He did take EE 201. He has his bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford. He graduated in '93. He was part of the Stanford Instructional Television program because he was working at Apple at the time, I believe. He's been at Apple. He's been at IBM. He's been at Apple. He's been at something called Navo NCI. He's been at something called DVDO. He's been at Silicon Images, and he is currently president and co-founder of Radiant Technologies Incorporated. Again, a fascinating set of steps over the last several years, and as I say, there's a lot to be learned here. Today he's going to talk a little bit more, with a little bit more focus on how to start a company, which I know is of interest to a lot of you. But again, I think seeing how his career has evolved from big to small to big to whatever is something that I think you're going to find fascinating. So with that in mind, Yano, I'm delighted to have you again, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Rick. So if we could have the slides up on the monitor also?
Yeah. The wood, that's the desk, I guess.
Yeah, right. Maybe it's better than my talk, though.
I don't think so.
Beautiful wood grain.
Okay,
great. And I'll be walking around a little here. I can't stand still very long. My name is Youl Banks, and as Rick said, I'm a Stanford alum, and I sat in these exact seats that you are sitting in now many years ago. I won't say how many. You'll figure out soon. And I remember, though, that the most important thing about this class was getting through it so you could get to dinner right afterwards, probably, huh? Anybody here in the eating clubs? Nobody in the eating clubs. Do they still have them over at Toyon? Wow, I thought all grad students went there. Boy, I guess they have better food now. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about here today. A couple things.
Let me just say, to show you what an old man I really am, if you think he's old, the reason I met Yano actually not through EE, because I met him because he was going to school here with my son. So he and my son are the same age, and that's an eye-opener for me, too.
Yeah, and we should tell the story also about how I got to speak here, but I'll do that later. Anyway, I'm going to talk about effectively, my life after Stanford and some ideas I had at the beginning about what I should do and what I shouldn't do. and then how it really turned out. But I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on the new adventure that I'm on right now, which is I have made a transition into management, and I'm now president of a small company, a startup company, 9 people, called Radiant Technologies. And what I want to do is share with you some of the, what we call tribal knowledge. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that you will learn in your career that unfortunately just aren't taught here at Stanford. And I know you probably realize that, but you'll learn it in spades in electrical engineering, both in your technical world, but also from a business standpoint. And some of the things, like I said, that I've learned in the last year really aren't written in books. And one of these days, my partner and I say we would write one, but we're too busy doing a company now. I also want to talk about, what at the end here my current career goals are. But at the end, I have some helpful hints. And this is also some tribal knowledge, if you will, or experiential knowledge that I'd like to impart to you, because hopefully at the end of this talk, you'll have an idea of the things that you might want to pursue and order in which you might think of pursuing them. And I'll just tell you how it turned out for me, and you can pick and choose as you like with your own career. Well, at Stanford, of course, it's very hard to leave this place. Very nice. Usually, every other time I've spoken here, it's been a beautiful sunny day in the winter quarter. Of course, today it's not the same, so we'll have to see how I do. I graduated here in '87, really, class of '87, but social class of '87, and actually graduated in '88 because I went overseas with the Stanford in Berlin internship program. Is that program still around? You know, the group internship program? Yeah. Now you're in grad school, I guess, predominantly here, so it might not be something you're pursuing, but I believe you can. It's one of the things that I think was very important in my life, both educationally, but more importantly, how to grow up. And so living in Germany, as I did for a year, Stanford gives you an internship for 3 months, but I extended that to 7 months, plus 3 months in Berlin studying, and then 2 months fooling around. And it was really something, and something that made me graduate without my class or separate from my class, but I would never trade it for the world. So it's something, if you have an opportunity, even to work overseas, I really recommend it. I also was a co-term student here, but then got burnt out, effectively. I know it's hard sometimes to keep on doing tests and wondering if you'll ever get paid and whether you'll ever be out of debt. So I went out on my own, in a sense, and got a job and went to Apple Computer. And while I was there, I had the zest again to renew my education, and I went through that in what was then called SITN. And I'm not sure what it's called today.
It's SCPD, Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Ah, of course. Much more professional. SITN was really fun in our days because we thought we could be sort of hippies, sit in, get it. Anyway, but we weren't hippies. We were older than that, or younger than that.
They don't have a clue what you're talking about.
Right. Rick was part of the hippie generation.
Yeah, right.
There you go. We're just envious. Okay, so when I started out, I studied electrical engineering, and I wanted to be a hardware engineer. And I thought I would have a plan that I'd learn the craft for 3 to 5 years, and then I'd go and be a manager because you went to Stanford, you're supposed to lead people, and so I figured I'd do that for a couple of 3 years, and I'd decide, well, maybe engineering, maybe marketing. One of the great things about an electrical engineering degree, as hopefully you've already noticed, is there's quite a few career opportunities for you, be it highly technical, marketing, sales. You'll find in most companies just about everybody is an engineer somehow. It's kind of funny at times. They'll call people sales engineer, marketing engineer. And, of course, those of us who are real engineers take offense to that sometimes. But anyway, the degree is very broad. And I think that's one of the great things about it. So in general, one of the things you'll notice, even if you get a PhD, I have friends who have continued on to a PhD, and they decided to go into sales. And it's pretty wild when you're in a sales meeting and the guy pulls out his card and it says, Dr. So-and-so. Anyway, I figured I would then decide what would I do next. So I had this plan. I figured I'd execute it. Looking at the opportunities then, you can look at the ladders, if you will, of both an engineering and a marketing career. And effectively, they have management, directorships, and then VP positions. And then what's sort of interesting at the very end there, at the highest part of, if you will, the triangle or pyramid, is the CEO or CTO roles. So you'll notice here that actually on the engineering side, of course, you have two choices at the executive ranks, in a sense, and on the marketing side, only one, to be CEO. Now, to be fair, most CEOs are marketing background, because one of the most important things about running a company, which I'm learning now, of course, is managing your money and making money and figuring out what people want and need. And so it's not surprising that most CEOs are actually from a marketing standpoint, because if you can't sell a product, it's not a company. So what really happened was that it wasn't only a few years that I was a hardware engineer. I actually was there for 7 years. So the question is, did I just not know much? Did I do poorly in my classes? Was I not cut out for this? No. What really happened was, or I like to say no, was that I liked what I was doing. And I really didn't think that when I started on the technical area that I would really enjoy it for a long time. I thought it was a stepping stone to then go off to do, a management career and so on, and be the boss and, all that kind of stuff. Again, because if you go to Stanford, you're supposed to be a leader. Remember that? Little pressure. Anyway, I did system design, chip design, also did some technology development, which was really interesting. I had a title at Apple back then, which was called PCI czar. And what that meant is I was the technical leader of the company's implementation of a standard called PCI, which is expansion card bus. It's been replaced now by PCI Express and things like that. But it was a neat job because I was in charge of the technical implementation across the company. And one of the things back then that was very interesting was Apple was very famous for doing Apple dash something. In other words, the standard was sort of there, but then there was an Apple twist, which often would cause problems in availability of products and so on. So my job back then was to make sure there was no prefix to PCI at Apple. There was no Apple dash PCI, and that was my job. So part of my job was actually technical evangelism, if you will, inside the walls of Apple Computer, because Apple has a reputation and has had a reputation, and deservedly so in many ways, of being quite proud of their ideas and the way it should be done and the way that computing should be done. But, of course, in the marketplace, sometimes that doesn't win. So after that, I also during that, actually, I applied for a lot of patents and was granted quite a few at that time. And then I thought, well, gee, I'm growing a little long in the tooth, and I really should do this management thing because I'm way behind my schedule right now. And if I'm ever going to be the CEO someday, then I better go and be a manager at least. So I took a class at Apple. They had an Apple University, believe it or not. And some companies, many companies actually have internal training, and they'll often call it Cisco University or whatever. Well, when I took that class, it was called So You Want to Manage? Kind of a leading question, right? So it was a class made for engineers, and it was taking you through what it's like to be a manager. Because as an engineer, you've gone through physics and all the electrical engineering classes, E&M, everything. So you think you're pretty smart, and you figure this management stuff, because the guy who's usually managing you isn't that great technically, it seems. So you think, this is going to be a breeze. Well, the class is actually quite an eye-opener. One of the things that the class does is it effectively, caters to engineers and caters to our weaknesses. And one of the things that's very difficult, I think, is in our roles as engineers, we often are given a very complicated yet single task, right? And you are very good at concentrating on pursuing that thing. It might be a long-term assignment, but you're trained to do that. Well, as a manager, there's no such luxury. You're never given enough time to do anything, really. And the exercise that they gave me in that class was what they called the inbox. And the inbox was an assignment where you are given 60 minutes. Sounds like a test. Maybe it should be 50 minutes, right? And you're given an inbox of items to do. And the situation is you have just come into a manager role, and the other manager has just been fired, and your best engineer is about to quit over it, and you have a customer who's yelling at you, and all the rest of the world is falling on top of you. And you're supposed to figure out what to do. And, of course, you have a task list that's too long. Well, I and my colleagues, most of my colleagues there, pretty much flailed. I mean, just couldn't do the assignment. And by the end of 60 minutes, I mean, I don't even know if I'd even prioritized the tasks yet. So it was kind of an eye-opener. But I said, it's just a class. This can't be real. Well, so I went ahead and said, I really want this manager job, and I had been a technical lead and so on and so forth. And so I said, I want that job. So my boss gave me a management job, a project leader job in the portables group at Apple Computer. And quite a challenging design and so on and so forth. It was actually, believe it or not, a tablet Mac circa 1996. So it's kind of funny, it never made it to market. But very challenging design. Well, I went to do this management job, and I just hated it. I mean, it was the worst thing I had ever done in my life. And I'd never felt real stress before. And it's sort of interesting. A friend of mine who had also made the transition from engineering to management, at one point I was asking him, because he was a few years older than I, and I wanted to know how it was going. So I asked him one day, how's the management thing going for you? And he said, well, people are a very interesting problem. And that's pretty much an engineer's approach, right? Everything's a problem that we have to solve. Well, as you can tell, that's probably not a great approach to dealing with people and so on. But I think it's something sort of in our psyche, and it's something that we need to learn about and learn through. So the point at that point was, literally I couldn't continue. I mean, I was miserable. It was the worst situation, tough in my family life as well. I'd been married then for a few years, and we'd had our first child. So any extra stress in your life at those times is actually really, compounded. So my wife and I discussed it, and she finally said, do you really have to manage? And I said, well, gosh, I'm supposed to. I'm from Stanford. I have to be a leader. Now, my wife has a PhD from Stanford, too, so at home, she's the doctor, and I'm the master. Now, you wonder, I say at home master may be better, I don't know. But but anyway, so she has a PhD. So she's very wise, and she said, if you're really not enjoying this, why are you doing it? So I had to swallow my pride and figure out what I could do for a living, because we had a kid to feed and a house to pay for, a mortgage. So I figured, well, gosh, I'll go back to individual contributing, go back to technical. Wasn't that big of a, black eye, if you will, to go back. And at Apple, it was often done, and technical people are highly valued there. So it really wasn't that difficult. It was probably most difficult for me to accept that I had failed against my plan. So it was really kind of a midlife career crisis, if you will, because if I can't manage, what am I going to do? The rest of that ladder was all management, and what am I going to do in 3 years, 5 years? Should I switch careers? What should I do? Well, I figured at that point that I really didn't have the marketing smarts, if you will. One of the classes I took here for my master's was, I forget what the number, but it was effectively MBA for electrical engineers, and I'm not sure if they still offer it. But I took that class, and as most of the other engineers in the class, it was all engineers taking effectively a business class, we all did very well on the problem-solving issues in companies. There's a major problem, how would you handle it, how would you prioritize? That was easy. But then they gave us marketing questions. And boy, that was hard, because as an engineer, right, things are based on math and science and things you can look up and apply and solve. But of course, marketing and people are a difficult problem. And it's really not something you can read a book and know how to do. You have to experience it. So I knew that really wasn't my area. So the funny thing was, I said, well, gosh, again on that ladder, if I got to get back on that path, I need to be a VP of engineering someday. But gosh, if I can't even manage front line, just engineers like me, a few months ago, gosh, maybe I'll never do that. So it was sort of a no man's land, if you will, at Apple, because I was a senior engineer, pretty accomplished, but in the technical ladder at Apple and at many other companies, Sun, also I believe Cisco, have a high-level engineering position that's individual contributing. And at Apple, it was called DEST, I think it still is, Distinguished Engineer, Scientist, and Technologist. However, there's only a few at Apple, I mean a handful. and you have to be nominated, all this kind of stuff. So my chance to become a desk was probably quite limited, and that would be about a director's level of authority and pay and so on, which is very nice. So the other thing was, Apple, you probably don't remember, but in 1997, Apple's death was actually predicted by, I think it was Time magazine. It said Apple RIP on the front of either Time or Newsweek. And it was a real tough time, had a couple of CEOs that didn't do well. And, Apple had lost all its market share to the 10% or 5%. So it looked like the company might be dying. I had been in management there, and during that time, I was excited about trying to bring the company back. But one of the things I was very jaded by was my colleagues at the time. And I went into the management all excited about going in there, and the company was in a tough shape even in '96 when I was managing. And I thought, well, gosh, if there's any way to have an impact on the company's potential comeback, well, if I'm a manager leading a bunch of people on an exciting product, perhaps that could really do it. And that seemed like it would be a great thing to do. Well, what I noticed in my management meetings, though, is that I expected to go in there, just like in my engineering team mentality, which was to team with the other managers to work on the problem, to work on bringing back Apple. How could we work together as a management team to do that? Well, I soon realized that my exuberance for bringing the company back and trying to get us all to work together was actually not well received. And it was one of these, naivete, if you will, and I like to say as engineers, we really are sometimes hurt by, but I think it's a great quality, and that is we're honest. We're honest, we want to do good, and all that kind of stuff. Well, in my management colleagues, nice people, but really weren't in it for the team. And it was pretty obvious, we actually got a bonus that year. The company had done very poorly, and we got a bonus. And I said to my colleagues, I said, well, I'm going to turn this in. I haven't done anything. And they're like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And, it's just one of these things that, it's just like it was really protect my situation at all costs. And I just was really disenchanted with the whole environment. So it just wasn't for me, and I thought, well, gosh, what do I do now? Well, I figured, okay, what else can you do? Let's go quit, do something else. And so I figured I better leave Apple. I'd grown up there, been to Stanford and Apple, and in many ways, Apple and Stanford are both called Disneyland in many times back then. And had I really lived in the real world. So I figured I better get out of here. I'm stagnant. The company's going down. I can't help. So let's just find something else. Well, the question is then, what do you do? So there's other big companies. Sun and Cisco back then were actually growing quite fast. This was in '97 or so. And, I could move laterally, and I knew people at the companies, had interviews, all that kind of stuff. But startups were also a very intriguing possibility at the time. Now, what it really appealed to me was it was intriguing and exciting and so on, but it was also a place where technical contributors could actually make a significant, or could garner, or could win a significant amount of the pot. In small companies, in startup companies, the original engineers in those companies are vital to the success because the company is just as good as its people who have ideas. And so as a result, you are, in a sense, higher valued than you are at a big company. The risk is significant. Some people say 1 out of 100 startups make it. Now, those are startups from the point where somebody says, I got an idea. When they finally actually get to really seriously going after a company, they say it's 1 in 10. And then as you get farther along, the odds get better. But the odds are really stacked against you. And I have many friends who are extremely talented people, and they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and their startups never made it. And they went through 2 or 3. So it is a big risk. Back in '97, though, it was an extremely hot market for startups. This was the internet boom was going through its growth, peaking, of course, in '99, probably 2000, and then a major crash, as you all know. And so there was plenty of opportunities, recruiters calling all the time. So I figure, let's go do an internet-related startup. So I chose a company called Navio. Navio was a startup from Netscape, spin out of Netscape, and a bunch of people from SGI. And it was a startup company that was mostly focused on software. I also thought at the time that it would be important for me as a hardware engineer to broaden my experience into software because that's where it was going to go. I was employee number 81, which is actually, about a somewhat mature startup. They were about a year old when I joined. And after a while, though, I realized that my whole interest in this company was just financial. I mean, the dollar signs were in my eyes when they said, hey, we're going public in 3 months. Now, I fell for it. Many other people fell for the same thing. But what I realized is after 4 months, when we hadn't gone public, of course, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's next, right? Because we hadn't gone public in 4 months. And they said 3. Well, I realized that I had no desire to do what we were doing there, and the only reason I was staying is because I wanted that get-rich-quick, payoff. And I found for me personally, and I don't know if it's everyone, but for me it's kind of hollow. You have to go to work all day, and one of the things, again, maybe a disease we all have, or some of us in engineering have, which is, you want to do good, you want to contribute, and you want to get something out of your job. I couldn't handle not liking what I was doing. And I couldn't just put in the time and wait for the magic public offering to happen. It was really eating me up. I mean, worse than my management job. And so I realized there that it just, wasn't going to work. And I quit after 5 months. Now, I've never quit anything in my life. I mean, I said I quit Apple, but really I left on great terms. I had many offers, all that kind of stuff. This company, I literally needed out. And I quit, and that was it. I went 5 months. So that was very difficult because it was, again, a failure. The first failure was, I didn't reach my career goal of being a manager by 3 to 5 years. Second thing is then I went off and did a startup because I thought that was the thing. I could be an individual contributor, I'd go to the startup, and that would be my next career move. Well, that failed too. So then it was really, kind of, gee, what do I do now? In fact, it was hard for me even to think of going to work. So at that point, as luck would have it, I had some friends who were, they were crazy back then. I mean, they were a bunch of my friends from the group we were in at Apple, and they started their own company. They were a few years older than me, so they had a little bit of money. I had nothing. And so they went up and started a company called DVDO. Well, I was in such, disarray. I mean, I couldn't figure out anything to do. And they said, why don't you come join us? And I didn't even think about it. I said, yes. In fact, my wife talked to my now partner, Dave, and said, he called her because we had our second child at the time. And I was over in Taiwan working on a project for Navio. And Dave asked her, if she needed any help. A nice friend of mine, and just called up. And she said, I'm actually doing fine, but Yano needs a new job. So again, I have to thank Gabi for all the good moves in our life, and this one was especially good. So literally, she said, hey, Dave, can you give him a job? And he goes, well, as luck would have it, we just got funding yesterday. I mean, literally. I mean, it was maybe 3 days before. It was very close. And so I came home, and I got back on Saturday afternoon. She told me about her conversation. I called up Dave, and I said, I want to meet the founders tomorrow at 8 a.m. Sunday morning, 8 a.m. I found out many years later that the rest of the founders weren't too happy about that. But I asked a few make-up questions just to make it look like I was sort of thinking about it, and then I said, hey, I'm in. Very unusual for me, right? I have everything planned out. Everything has to be, according to plan. Well, this one I just, was pretty much desperate and took the job. Well, didn't know what I was getting into. It was a real startup. I was employee number 7, and we had kind of a rallying call. There was an old boss of ours at Apple who thought, of course, all of us who were his underlings could never do a company. So he came in one day to see the guys, and they were 5 people at that point. and he said to them, "You guys look like 5 guys in a room with a pipe dream." So that was then our rallying call for the whole company, FGIRWPD. It was actually the password for our server system and so on. And every time we'd pass in our server, we'd think of that old boss and say, "We're going to make it," because Dad says we can't. So anyway, it was really the best career experience in my life. I think now with Radiant, it's even more exciting. But at that point, it was very important in my life that I had something to actually work on. And it was exactly what I was looking for, 100% technical role with people that I respected. They were smart. We were all trying this crazy thing. How could we succeed anyway? In a sense, we couldn't lose. We were going to get paid. We were going to get experience. And for me, as a non-founder, the only risk was, well, if they run out of money, I got to get another job. But hopefully, in this role, I can learn so much that it'll be easier, to get a job. Well, we actually made it. Timing is everything. We got acquired in March of 2000, which was actually the peak of the market. By July, it had then fallen already when we finally got acquired. And then what happened was I was then in, if you will, a safe zone. We were acquired by a company named Silicon Image, a former startup. And what happened was, if you may remember, but from 2000 to 2001, it was probably the greatest free fall in the markets that has been experienced since, practically the Depression. And what was interesting specifically in my situation was I was one of 14 members of a company that got purchased for $54 million, and I had vested most of my shares. So on paper, I was actually a millionaire. And so what happened was the stock was at $64 when we got acquired on paper. When we finally joined the company, it had gone to $45. By the time we finally got stock into our accounts, even though we'd already bought it all, it was $35. And within about 7 months, it was $1. So needless to say, I'm not rich. But it was a very interesting ride and one of these things that you could never predict. And the one lucky thing out of it is my 1984 Celica finally wouldn't pass smog. So I had to buy a new car. So when the stock was at that 35 point, I took out just enough money to buy a new car. And it was just another Toyota, but it was a new car. And and I got a lens for my camera, which of course now is obsolete because I have a digital camera. But anyway, it was a great experience. What it really was is to realize what are you working for? What's important. Again, it was this point that said, when I was trying to make it with Navio, again, it was purely financial as the motivation. With DVDO, it wasn't the motivation at all, but then the winnings were there, but suddenly taken away. And so it was really something that says, hey, I'm in my mid-30s at the time, and I'm going to have to work for a few more years, it turns out, unfortunately. And so how am I going to get through this? Well, the real thing was to learn, for me anyway, that you want to get something out of what you're doing, because it really is a crapshoot of whether the stock market for your company is going to go crazy, and more importantly, are you going to sell at the right time? I've been at many companies who've done very well at different times. Sometimes I've timed the stock correctly. That's how we bought our first house. Apple stock went up. I sold some. We were able to buy a house. But most of the time, it really is a crapshoot. And so it's really what I view it as is a bonus. If you do have a stock winning, that's a bonus in your life. Anyway, what was nice about Silicon Image is a safe place. I'd be paid every day and so on. But it was also a former startup, so the environment was pretty neat. A lot of PhDs, a lot of smart people. At this company, it was small enough that I'd have a contribution that was important to the company. And while we were there, actually, I and the other 4 remaining DVDOers, because the founders left after a year when the stock went to $1 and they canceled our projects. They all left, but the rest of us had to work for a living. And so we invented a new technology called HDMI. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's high-definition multimedia interface. And it is the authorized interface for HD content. And it's mandated, actually, for all DVD players and set-top boxes and televisions that want to show HD content that is protected. And so that was a really neat thing and a great time there. It was also an interesting place to transition from an engineer to a manager. Smaller company. I, again, started out as an individual contributor, but the technical leadership was very strong there and very valued. And after a while, it was obvious that, our director really wasn't adding value. And it was actually a very interesting thing. And in fact, that was one of the tough things about doing that transition. I became a manager. I actually enjoyed it. I really enjoyed leading the team. But there was some really interesting things about a very difficult boss that we had. And finally, a VP came in who we really respected. And the hardest thing in my career probably was firing my boss. I mean, the VP came to me and said, what are you going to do? I see the writing on the wall. You got to tell me the truth. And that's a pretty hard situation to do things in a respectful way, but also to understand that your team's success depends on the management success. And what a difficult situation, and when you get into management situations, they are sometimes very difficult. And that is that, a boss above you says, I want to talk to you without your boss about your boss, and I want to fire him. And more or less saying, do you agree? So that was a real test, And, we fired him, and it was the right thing to do. And that was a huge thing for me to gain confidence in my ability to be a manager. So I was really into it. It took me 15 years instead of 5. Remember, I thought that I'd do it in 5 years. So after 15 years, I finally made it and to that goal. And I wasn't going to go back. I really enjoyed it. And then the thing was, the company also, though, as a larger company than a startup, there's a lot of inefficiencies in politics which are just not that fun and impedes progress. Well, I always had the desire to go to startups again. The DVDO experience was such a great thing in my life, and of course it was lucky, right? We made it. But the itch was still there. But what I said in this class the last 3 or 4 times that I gave this talk was that I knew I would always go back to startups someday. And the environment in those 5 years actually was pretty tough to do so. So why did I do it now? So actually last end of May, June 1st roughly, I decided to quit my job at Silicon Image and get out of the safe zone and go and start this company. So why? Why did I do it then? Well, I'd accomplished what I wanted to. I put away some buffer money. We have 3 kids now, so I always have to pay attention to that, and the economic environment was better. There were some more startups getting funded. I also had an idea, which I thought was unique. I had a partner, former DVDO CEO, Dave Book, and I had a lot of friends who were actually itching also to go back to startups. They also had gone into the safe zone, if you will, for about 5 years, and they were ready to go do another startup. And by the way, I turned 40 last year, and what the heck? You got to do something. Some guys buy a sports car. I decided to start a company. I don't know. I guess we're different. Anyway, so how do you start a company? I wanted to tell you how to do this in I guess I have a little more than that, about 7 minutes. I want to leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Got to have an idea, but the most important is you got to have some other people. This is a daunting task to start a company. Now, I benefit from my partner, David Book, was the CEO of DVDO, and he's actually founded 3 other companies. So he had experience in the tribal knowledge. We had to write a business plan, never done that before. Think of writing a report for a class at Stanford and then multiply that by, tenfold, because effectively this is your piece of paper that you go begging for money with. And so that was a very interesting thing. So there were fun parts of that, the idea and the vision of the company, that's all fun stuff. The team, products, market, technology, and even competition. Those were all fun things. But I tell you, the hard stuff was the cap table, capitalization table, sales forecasts, how much you're going to sell, financials in general, and an exit strategy. If you're going to go beg for money, you've got to give people a reason why they want to put their money in you. And the reason they're putting it in you is because they want money out. So you've got to tell them how you're going to do that. Well, you then have to create the capitalization table and the desired term sheet. And I recommend that you actually create your term sheet yourself. Most VCs will tell you that, or they'll ask you when they first see you, they'll say, who wrote your term sheet? And what that means is that a VC is the one who usually dictates the terms. But we've read a lot of books and talked to a lot of other entrepreneurs, and I believe the right way to do it is go ahead and write your own and see if they'll buy it. What do you have to lose? And by the way, in figuring out what you think your valuation and your term sheet should be, you then they know right away that you know what you're talking about. A lot of startups will go and say, hey, you know, we got a great idea, and they go to a VC and they have the nice coffee and the nice desks and everything, and they don't even know what a valuation is. And they find out then after the fact that they've been taken. Jim Clark, actually, you know, very famous former Stanford professor, I guess he's emeritus probably now, founder of Netscape, and he was at SGI, I think he founded that too. Anyway, in one of his books, he talks about that. And he said the next time when he did Netscape, there was no way he was going to be taken. Because it was so hurtful to him to find out that these people in these nice clothes and everything that treated him so nice were actually trying to take him. And when Netscape, when SGI, went public, he got, a small percentage of it, and the VCs went home with all the money. And he just felt like he'd been betrayed. Interesting story is when they got bought, when Netscape, then when he did that and he did it on his terms, a very sad story, but something to highlight it is that there was one VC, I read this, that he really wanted in this time, and Jim Clark wouldn't let him in, and the guy ended up committing suicide over it. So you got to wonder, the motivations of people and so on. So a very sad story, but it sort of highlights, the kind of things you're playing with in these areas. So one of the things, capitalization table, what is it? It's effectively how much you're going to divide up the company for yourself, founders, the investors, and your employees. And that's all it is. I mean, it sounds like a big thing, and that nobody ever teaches you. It's just adding, subtracting, and dividing. That's all it is. And carving up a pie. But you got to think about it. If a VC wants 51% of your company, how much is left for you, your employees, and maybe some other investors? Because usually when you get started, you have some seed money or something to just at least come up with something. So, doing that analysis, you really have to understand what you're getting into. On fundraising, this was the biggest part, really, that was absolutely new to me. And what you have to decide is, are you going to take institutional money, venture capitalists or banks sometimes, or do you want to take it from what are called angels? Angels are effectively rich people, individuals who want to play in the risky game of startups, sometimes just out of fun because they were an engineer who made it and they'd like to give something back and have some fun at it, but also it's an investment. But they are also, I find, very savvy and helpful at times. Now, don't get me wrong, VCs are very helpful and very instrumental to the success of many companies. But you really want to know where you stand in your company situation. So the most important things to decide of whether you're going to go for VC money or angel money is, first of all, how much money do you need? If you need $100 million, you're never going to raise that from angels. There just aren't enough angels in the world, and most angels only give out $50,000 to $100,000 max. And also, how much control do you want to give up? Okay, so if you give up 51% of your company, of course, you've lost voting rights over major things. One of those voting rights is whether you get fired. And it's very common for entrepreneurs who have started the company, had their idea, and so on, to actually get fired by the VCs. Why? Well, because they're probably not that great a manager. But it really hurts, right? It's your idea, you got these people together, and then they fire you. Why? Because they have 51%. Now, many times you should have been fired. But sometimes it seems like a power play and so on. But you just got to realize what you're getting into. Also, are you attractive to a VC? What is the multiple that they can expect if you make it? Now, they realize you're not going to make it all the time, right? They know the odds. But a VC, because of that, and they're going to put a lot of money in, usually, they want to know what's the multiple of the return. Not percent, but X. So they're looking for 100X return. That's what they usually want. Angels are hoping for 10X, and some are even happy with 3X. DVDO was 8X upon liquidation, and our angels were extremely happy with that. Anyway, what is our plan? Well, we did what's called a hybrid bootstrap model. That's what we made up for it. It's effectively what we could do, which was we went to friends of ours who were VCs, knowing that what we were doing probably wasn't interesting to them. But our angels actually asked us to go and see what they would say. So great feedback, and effectively what they told us was, look, you're only asking for a couple $1 million. So it's really not enough stake in the company for us. But when you get larger and you need a bigger chunk, come back and see us, because it'll actually be a lower risk for them as well. Okay? And it's very interesting because venture capitalists and entrepreneurs are really at odds at times, because I used to think venture capitalists are very risky, big risk takers, and entrepreneurs, of course, are risk takers. Well, it turns out venture capitalists are quite conservative in many ways. And so there's some certain things that happen, but you'll look at when you get grilled by a VC and when you get grilled by an angel, there's a much different tone in that. And the obvious thing is it's more financial, of course, with the VC, and maybe more, success-oriented only. Success meaning you did something that was useful and you made some money out of an angel. So the way we got started is we took $10,000 out of our own personal bank accounts, 5K, 5K. Then we started doing some moonlighting. Then we put in 50K each. And we had 100K to play with, hired a first engineer, hired a contracting business guy. And then we went off to raise the money. And so we set out to raise $2 million, and we raised a little over $1 million. And that was enough to hire our first 9 employees total and to get going. So what are we going to do now? Well, we closed that after just 3 months, and then we expect, because our business plan shows that we need $2 million over time, that we'll go and raise another $1 million later this year. So I just say that nonchalantly now, but it's pretty difficult to go and beg and receive money. So don't be surprised at that difficulty. Another thing is you manage your cash in a startup company. A startup company is all about a bank account. It's very simple economics. I took that finance class again in my master's program, and you learn about all the balance sheet and blah blah blah. Well, bottom line is it's a bank account, and if it runs to zero, you're done. And so it's actually pretty simple. And so we were at first thinking, okay, let's see, should this be capital or should this be expense? And finally we go, hey, look, it's the same bank account. And it actually simplifies it quite a bit. So what am I going to do now? Well, I want to make Radiant successful. Again, I told you I have 9 employees, and we're already selling products. So please go to our website, radiant.com, 2 I's and an E. E for entertainment, 2 I's, Y. You need 2 I's to see, and also every correctly spelled English word has been taken with .com. Anyway, we're going to have our own products this quarter that we've designed ourselves. So Dave and I are pretty proud about this. We have taken the company from its inception to real products that we're selling within 4 months after our first employee. And we'll have our own designed products within 7 months. And that's the fastest we've ever done it. And one of the reasons to do that is so that if you have income, you have less, your burn rate is canceled, if you will, right? So again, just manage your cash. If you have some revenue and some income, then your burn rate gets counterbalanced. And so the idea is to be cash flow break even. So anyway, and then after that, hopefully I'll do it again and probably again, because you never know. This company might not make it. Others will. And then if that doesn't work, I really feel that I've learned so much already in these 7 months that I can do those VP jobs at the bigger companies. And the reason is because, man, I've had to do it from scratch. And there's nothing that can be harder. So I have a lot of confidence now that I'll always be gainfully employed. And my kids will go to college. So my ultimate goal, though, is to first get summer vacation, then retire. Anyway, a couple helpful hints. I'm just going to flash these up because time's up. Negotiating your startup deal, maybe I'll send you the presentation. These are really handouts. And these are some hints that you can take when you're going to a startup company and how you can negotiate a deal. Big companies and small companies, sort of showing them side by side and what the advantages of each. And then technical and management careers. What are the advantages of each and what are you getting into? What I hope to convey is effectively, what are you getting into? And that's it. So effectively, just, I had a plan, and I think it's a good idea to have a plan for your career, but don't freak out, if it doesn't turn out the way you planned it. The other thing is there's rewarding jobs in a fully technical ladder, and just realize that that's an option. And finally, just do what you enjoy, because the bottom line is, if you like what you're doing, there's a book says, do what you love and the money will follow. And I really believe in that. And that's what I want to talk about, and I open it up for questions now.
Let's give Jano a real hand. I hope you'll agree with me that this really is an eye-opening presentation. A couple of quick things here. Please, and you've been good about doing this before, if you see a sign-up sheet near you, bring it up to me. That's really helpful because I do have to collect all 10 of them. We will take certainly a few questions. Well, why don't we do that now? Let's see. Anybody have any questions? Yes. You need to use the mic again in front of you.
I'll also stay afterwards if you have a